So, good day and welcome to whoever is watching. This is called Show Up Truth. And Show Up Truth's intention is to be an inspiration for emerging leaders to find their own unique way of leading. Intention is to inspire you all to rise in whatever way you are here to lead. So my name is Shannon, and I am a shamanic healer, shamanic practitioner, and a lot of the flavor comes through in the form of intimacy coaching. I won't get too much into my story today because I have someone here I really want to hear from. And today I'm interviewing Joshua Hathaway. And I've been watching Joshua for some time in his journey through what I perceive as taking a huge stand for relationships and for what authenticity and integrity and personal power looks like within connecting with other people. He took me firsthand when I saw his website, which is Master Your Bullshit. I am a big fan of no bullshit communication. I feel that there is a bridge between nonviolent communication and where we need to be as humans today, which involves that we have the word fuck, we have this energy of aggressiveness in our culture, and so we really need to honor that as we go into compassionate communication. So he took me first off with this no bullshit communication, which is partly why I have him here today. What I'll introduce about him from my understanding is he is still doing the same thing, but it's evolving even more in the world. And why I have him on today is because he's very public about his relationship with his beloved and his process with that. So there's some keys that I would like to receive from you for this time here with regards to some of the topics that we'll be going into. Just to set the stage, is we'll be talking about divine union. What is divine union, both on the individual level and the interpersonal level? Where do you fall into the realms of different relating styles, and how there's it's like a free-for-all now because we're all wanting to be free in our expression, but it can be messy. And where do you fall in that, and where have you found integrity rests? And a little bit about that. And then talking a bit about fatherhood to end this all, because I also know you're a father. So I would love for you, if I have been incomplete in any way, to introduce yourself briefly, and then we can get started.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on, Shannon. It's great to be here with you. I'm really glad that we're both wearing hats today. It makes me happy. And yes, as you said, my brand is masteryourbullshit.com. Please check it out. Sign up for my emails. You'll get emails in your inbox for the next week that will rock your world, talking about no bullshit communication and how we collectively can embrace our bullshit so that we can find the golden nuggets of universal humanity and vulnerability. They're always buried inside of every little piece of bullshit we try to pass as truth in the world. And that's our projection bullshit, that's our demand bullshit, that's our reactive bullshit, that is our avoidant bullshit, and our victim bullshit. And so I've dedicated my life to really becoming, befriending that bullshit in myself, so that I'm no longer run by it, so that I can make conscious choices about how I connect and communicate. And my journey as both a meditator, as a martial artist, as a somatic and transpersonal psychotherapist, and as a teacher of communication, has led me to understand that it is within the arc of intimacy that the greatest awakening is available. So my work is truly around awakening through intimacy. And so it's about really learning to unhide ourselves and to stop performing an identity and come more and more into deeper contact and more effortless alignment with our essence and who we are as beings. And that includes undoing a lot of conditioning and who we were told to be and what we were trained to value, violently trained to value, I might add. And for women, it is learning to claim your voices and learning to claim your truth and express yourselves and set really healthy boundaries. And for men, this process is about reclaiming our sensitivity in a culture that has violently trained us to numbness and trained us to not live in our bodies. And it's also, in doing so, then we reclaim our capacity to deeply listen And so we're in this collective mirroring process of learning how to honor and revere one another in our differences, and in an internal healing process that can only be done within intimate connection. That doesn't have to be romantic intimate connection, but it has to be intimate connection, because all of our deepest woundings, all of our traumas were inserted, not all, but the vast majority of the most powerful traumas that run our lives were installed within primary bonding and intimate relationship. And so it's only in that context that we get to have access to that work to be done in our own hearts. And it is only with tremendous attention to cultivating our capacity to be present in the presence of high sensation and strong impulses that we can be each other's greatest ally in healing.
So thank you. And even in just your share, I'm noticing a lot of stuff come up for me in just the way you are expressing yourself. And that's the nature of the thing. And I will say, like, this is an intimate interaction. And the reason why it's an intimate interaction is because I've committed previous to recording that I'm here to be transparent in my healing process as well. And so I might speak about my own personal experience, because part of why I have you on, and I've shared this with you and for whoever's watching, is I need help. I need help anchoring into more of what is true. And I don't mean we all need to be living the capital T truth and everyone needs to look the same, because that's not what I'm sharing about. But in my evolution of watching relationships and doing my own inner alchemy, because I didn't get given the best example and most of us haven't, there's a need for emulating qualities and sort of matching those in other people. In my process, I like go through the world, and I know my mother and father didn't really embody divine mother and divine father. I might talk a little bit around the place, and I'm still being an eloquent communicator, but divine union to me, why I'm sharing this, is a union internally of the masculine and the feminine and the child, the father, the mother, the sacred child, that trinity being embodied within us. But in 2020, we're no longer going onto the mountaintop to embody divine union and then we meditate for the rest of our lives. It's like, how do we now be in that while now connecting with other selves, other whole and of themselves, but parts, you know? So it's like, I am not a whole. Like, I am a whole, but in 3D world, I am a part of a lot of other parts. And so I think in the journey and what I've watched through clients coming in, through friends, and through the topic of twin flames and through the topic of divine union, there's a lot of like information just like coming out. And so my intention is to come from a level of depth that brings clarity to that whole process for people, for myself and for whoever's watching. I'm a lot came up for me when you shared, so I guess I'll go for that, is that I personally am here to embody divine union. My path, my mission is very abstract. There's no do these things. It's I'm here on the planet to birth heaven on earth. Now, I've always known that, but that's such an abstract thing because it's not one action. It's actually making every single part of my life congruent with what that means for me, and then living that. Partly, the hugest part of the divine union, heaven on earth, bridging all that, is the heart, and is my human heart. And my personal human longings, desires, attractions, repulsions, and all of that is actually a part of birthing heaven on earth. Now, the biggest tension that I have watched in my own life and watched in other women who've come to me for healing has been this topic of polyamory. And I am in no way against polyamory as an explorational tool for discovering what our desires are, our edges are. I've noticed that what it can do for people is it can expand people beyond their limited, suppressed conditioning enough to think outside the box and be like, wow, I didn't even know that all these things that I was told were for sure a no. I actually kind of like those things. And like, I'm kind of turned on by that freaky shit. And like, huh, that's fascinating. But what I see is that it can make people then identify with being that and then actually lose their inner connection with this part of them that does desire union with a human being in this really tight kind of a container. And
Mm-hmm.
so I've had a difficult time trying to disperse what my knowing is about that into the world, because I don't have a beloved partner choosing to be in that dynamic with me. I have actually been in divine union and then had that person leave due to thinking through needing to be polyamorous. So I'm very tender in my heart, which is also why I'm having this moment of interviewing you, because I've watched you go from various different kinds of interacting to what I would consider a very refined, specific container that you are openly discussing these topics, and you're openly in the exploration of how in the past you might have denied that and why. And so I'm wanting you to share about a man from a man and a father, because that's what you're bringing here, the perspective of the journey of going from the teenage expression of like needing to explore all these things to having like a refined understanding of what you actually need and how that
Mm-hmm.
might be in alignment with that kind of a relating style. So I would love for you to bring as much clarity to this topic as possible. I know this is way more multidimensional for people than just one conversation.
For sure.
Thank
Well,
you.
let me thank you for that, and let me contextualize with a couple of things. First of all, I don't want anything that I say to be believed. Any sort of principles that I share today to be believed. If the only value that anything I have to say today is for you to go experiment in your own life and take a perspective for a moment and try to experiment, because what we're coming out of collectively is this sort of is Gaia's sort of experiment in radical individuality, right? Where everybody is an individual. Western culture is like the apotheosis of the individual, right? And we have an economic system which rewards greed and selfishness, right? Sociopaths are the ones who move to the top of the economic and political and sort of power systems in the way that we've set up the way we do life, right? So we're in the midst of a radical sort of shakedown, massive pressure on that sense of top-down hierarchical thinking,
Like
which
I have to
starts
do it all
internally.
myself kind of thing.
What's that?
Like I have to
Yeah,
fend
I have
for
to do it all
myself.
myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it goes deep. It starts internally with this sense that everything starts up here, that the brain is the boss, is the king of the body, and tells the body what to do. This whole sense that we're coming from this, oh, if I have the right idea, then I'm going to have it right. No. Your whole body has to be involved in your experiment. Your whole life is your experiment. So go out and experiment courageously and follow your desire, follow what you feel excited about. Right. I talk about the sort of the place where my desire and my fear are crossing, like that's where my compass leads all the time, in a sense, when it comes to my growth, when it comes to passionately um, 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 diving into my life and becoming the fullest expression of me that I can be, and becoming the fullest agent and sovereign king in this world. I have to be radically and honestly seeking out what is truly my desire and what scares the shit out of me. And so please go and experiment with this
That's
stuff.
what brings like evolution, is that crux between those two, fear
That's right.
and
It's
where
like
your desire is.
setting your compass for what the scariest, truest thing to say in any given moment. That's just it. That's the definition of intimacy and vulnerability, right? When people are committed to not having any hidden agendas, right, by withholding information that they think will have an impact that they don't want and make a person go away, right, that's not intimacy. Intimacy is revealing fully all of the agendas, revealing all the fears, revealing the past that might sort of turn somebody off in a way, right? So that's the first thing I want to contextualize with before I get into my story. And well, I think I actually hit them both. So where to begin? I will say that, the other piece is that I come from a developmental framework, which means that I have watched my own son develop. I have studied development intimately, and we're constantly moving through developmental processes as human beings. And anybody who knows a developmental process, you know that the process is experimental and it's messy. That things get even messier right before you kind of pop open into the next developmental sort of milestone, and you are sort of anchor and integrate a whole new level of operations, right? And that
people run in relationships too. They run sometimes when it starts getting messy, and they're like, this must not be the thing, when they could be actually squeezing through to a new dimension of relating. But I also know it's important to discern whether or not it's not. I guess what I'd also like from you, I'm just throwing a bunch of shit. How do we discern between the messy that's actually about to catalyze some kind of change versus the messy that's just a fucking shit show that's not
right
moving anywhere per se?
Yeah, that's tricky discernment, and then it's got to be understood from each person. What I will say is that every true developmental leap feels like a death. Like the old you is going to be utterly challenged. Now, the clear line in all of this when we're talking about relationship is abuse. Like, do not accept abuse. If somebody is calling you names consistently, if somebody is lying to you consistently, if somebody is physically harming you consistently, then get the fuck out of there. That's not okay. You have to have a boundary and say, until, either get out of my life and stay out of my life. I forgive you, bless you. I hope your journey is good, but I do not accept abuse. I do not accept somebody abusing me verbally, emotionally, or physically in my life. Like, that has to be a boundary. And that boundary is good for everyone. You cannot, nobody wins when somebody is accepting abuse. Nobody wins. And so we have to be able to set those boundaries. And in certain cases, those boundaries might be, clean up your shit. And I'm willing to meet you in 2 months or 4 months to see what's here. And we'll talk more about that. That's something that happened in my relationship. But we have to be really acutely attuned to abusive behaviors. And when people deny our own experience, when people call us names, even if they're subtle names, like that's stupid, or you're stupid, or silly, when people are consistently dishonest with us, or when people physically harm us and cross our physical boundaries, or don't listen to us when we are saying no, like those are huge red lights that person is not a safe person, and you need to set a boundary, right? And so that's about having standards, and what's required of us. I just wrote this quote actually last night. Let's see if I can bring it back up. The only way to get someone to participate in a system that is exploiting them is to convince them that either they're incapable of having better or they're not worthy of having better, right? And then in some extreme cases, the threat of punishment and harm if they do not participate, right? But this is the thing that abusers do, and it's not a conscious thing. Those abusers are sick. They're not well. They have been very, very deeply traumatized and have come out into the world thinking that this is how they get their needs met, when in fact, there's no way for anyone to get their needs met in those strategies. But don't ever let someone convince you that you're not worthy of or incapable of better. Anybody who tries to convince you of that is not a safe person to be around. So that's what I'll say about boundaries, right? And about where that threshold lies. And there are lots of nuances beyond that we can get into. And I can talk from my own personal experience about one. Codependency is something that all of us are going to have to face along the way to having an exquisite relationship, which walks the tightrope between sovereignty and interdependence. We cannot have relationships that are only about sovereignty. If we're about sovereignty, this is the masculine principle, right? If we're only about sovereignty and freedom, then nobody's touching each other, and nobody's like, no, there's no hugs, But if we're all about interdependence and care, then we can just be smothering each other, right? We have to be radically sovereign beings, fully responsible for our own feelings, our own choices, our own words, and our own experience, and be radically independent beings, recognizing that we do not live in a vacuum, that every word that we speak and action that we take has an impact. and be willing to be present with that impact and listen and understand it, right? And so coming back to this developmental process that we're in collectively around how to do relationship, right? We, just like a human being goes through a process, communities go through a process, nations go through a process, the globe is going through a process. COVID is an amazing, like literally when my son would be in a developmental process and he would be about to pop through to another developmental like accomplishment, he would always get a fever. Like right before it happened, he would get a fever and he would get sick and he would revert to like younger behaviors, right? And we as parents, we were not like Tylenol parents, so we would run a lukewarm bath for him. We would let him burn through that fever very naturally because it's a natural thing for the body to create fever, right? And then literally the next day or 2 days later, like he would just be a new person with like talking in full sentences or like having a whole new level of awareness and presence and capacity, right? So I see COVID as the global fever right now. Like we literally, like Gaia has a fever because she is about to pop through to a whole nother level of collective beingness that is inclusive of sovereignty, right? Because nobody leaps right from like one developmental phase into the perfect expression of the next. You have to go through the messy experiments of over exaggerating. Just like if I'm about to fall off of one side of the tightrope, I'm not just going to stand straight up. I'm going to like flop over the other and be like, oh, okay, here we go. That's how it works. It never doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So with all that in mind, I see polyamory as an essential discovery process. What I've said before, and I don't know if I stand by it, I think there are some people who come in really clear and kind of meet their one really early on and can rock that. Mm-hmm. But what I say to sort of drive the point home is that I don't think anybody can make a conscious choice to be in a monogamous relationship if they have not at least considered and done some experimentation with polyamory. And I say that because if all you ever got to choose from was chocolate ice cream, but there's actually a bunch of other flavors of ice cream, and you claim that chocolate is just your favorite flavor of ice cream, but you've never actually tasted any other flavor of ice cream, like, I'm sorry, I don't trust your opinion on ice cream. You're not an expert on ice cream at that point. So that's my radical claim that I want people to actually like rub up against and fight against if you need to, in order to come to your own truth. But what I will say is that my journey has taken me through polyamory, and I am so grateful. I was in a committed long-term relationship with my son's mother for 13 years, essentially. Our relationship, for all the gifts that came out of it, was not a fit for either of us. We were both kind of just drowning in that relationship, so we ended it. And it was a mutual ending. And I was really clear that I wanted to explore polyamory after that relationship. After being with the same woman for 13 years, I was like, I want to experience multiple, I want to taste the buffet of the feminine. I want to understand myself better in relationship, because every relationship is a different kind of mirror that evokes different aspects of me, right? And that draws forth different aspects of me, different light and different shadow. And so I was just on a podcast yesterday with Jetty Azuma, who's just an amazing men's leader. And we were talking about dating as a rite of passage. And whether you call it polyamory or you just call it dating, which I think there are fuzzy lines there.
Yeah, polyamory, I mean, to me, my understanding of polyamory is a relationship label that means I am in intimate, deeper relationship with multiple people. That includes some level of physical interaction, whereas dating may not be sexual, may not be physical, may not be any of that, and it's more of like an exploration process that someone might date and then decide that they want to be in a poly relationship with some of these people they're dating. But poly, to me, at least what I understand, is like, it's like a resting, like I am this kind of a relator, and I am going to be in multiple deep relationships with multiple people. And that's at least what I understand that word to be.
Sure. And that's a fair distinction. And I think it breaks down for me in the level of intimacy that I bring to dating. I don't do relationship in a not intimate way. Like that doesn't happen in my world. And so when does me like dating multiple women and having very intimate, like deep exchanges with them and very honest, ongoing, you're not the only person I'm having this deep, intimate, honest exchange with. Where does that become polyamory? Is it a length of time? So there's some fuzzy distinctions there.
So I
And
guess,
there is like an implicit bias that we have in our culture that dating isn't actually intimate, which I think is dangerous. And it's something that I'm doing my best to change through my Authentic Dating Secrets program, which is
I guess just
really
saying polyamory is something where there's like more agreements and more
sure.
talked about
Yes.
container.
Of course, yes. And people can claim, most people won't claim that I'm a dater as a relationship style, right?
Some people
they,
will.
they,
Some people will say, I'm a dater. I just date. I know women
right,
that probably
right.
say that, but.
And that's like unicorn poly in some way, right? Or that's some kind of like solo poly thing, right? So, I mean, there are so many labels, but we have to look at what's happening, and what's happening is what we have to ask ourselves is, as human beings, are we capable of having deep, intimate, romantic connection with more than one person at a time? And believing there's a whole swath of people who believe that's not possible, right? There are a bunch of people who believe it's possible, like myself, but don't choose to do that, right? And then there's a refining of what I get to mean by deep, intimate, committed relationship, right? And I was in a 4-year-long, deep, intimate, committed relationship that was an open relationship where we had other lovers and partners, right? Or not, we had other lovers. We didn't have other partners, right? But all of our lovers were sort of intimate exchanges because we are intimately sort of driven human beings, Kate, Catherine, and I. And so in my own journey, that's kind of where I landed. My former partner and I got into a relationship that was founded on an open system, that we were unwilling to stop somebody from following their joy and their like true desire because we were afraid that it was going to mean I was going to get less of something, right? That's a zero sum model of like, if I'm not going to get enough of what I need if you are sharing your intimacy and receiving pleasure from somebody else, right? That's the core fear there, right? And I think we navigated that relationship really beautifully. There were phases where we were naturally just closed, that we were just with each other, like building and connecting and deepening in our relationship. And then there were phases where we were like opening out to the world. And that would inevitably lead to some phases of kind of closing back in again and being like, we got to take care of this relationship because there's been some things stirred up and some fear and mistrust that's been stirred up. And then we would open out again, right? So we did that dance for a while, and I think we did it really beautifully. And what made that work for us, and what makes any relationship work, period, whether it's poly or monogamous, is transparency, empathy, deep listening, and clear agreements, right? What are your agreements? How crystal clear are they? Do you know where the lines are? Can you communicate can you be the one to communicate first when you have crossed a line? Oh shit, I crossed a line. Can you even better communicate when you want to cross a line and make sure that that's like transparent and that everybody's safe ported, right? There are so many levels and in which communication is just core when it comes to navigating a successful relationship, whether you call it polyamorous, whether it's an open, committed relationship, or whether it's a monogamous container, right? And it was during an open phase of my relationship with Katie that I met Lily, my current partner. And Lily was the first woman that I met within my relationship with Katie that I like totally fell in love with. Like I fell in love with her. Like my body wanted to make a baby with this woman, like really early on. And I was just like, whoa, this is some new territory for me. And the interesting thing is that Katie and I were having a mirrored experience. She fell in love with a lover at the same time, right?
Which usually in relationships, we are having very mirrored experiences in
totally.
our own way.
Yeah, mirrored or complementary. And and so a long story short, I was totally transparent with Katie. We were totally transparent with each other. I was transparent with Lillian about being in a relationship and the structure of my relationship. But at a certain point, it became really painful for me to love both of these women and imagine having to split my life between them. Because at a certain point, we have to be honest with ourselves that choices exclude. That I cannot give my full intimate attention to you at the exact same time as I can give my full intimate attention to somebody else. Like, it's a different quality of attention that I can give to two people at once,
Like,
right?
what
But
are your actual abilities?
yes, capacity is what we call it, right? What's your capacity? And so, and some people have more capacity for intimate, for a sort of divided, intimate attention to some extent, and some people have less. But when I realized this, I asked both of these women if they would be willing to explore a triadship relationship with me. And so they were both willing, which meant that the three of us would be in an intimate closed container. And as an investment in that, they both went to Mexico together for a week before we ever really spent much time together. And they got to know each other. And they fell in love with each other, actually. It was beautiful to watch them have that experience of getting to know each other and really enjoying each other. And we came back together and lived together for about 6 weeks and explored as an experiment in relating. And we had many beautiful experiences, and we developed deep, deep love, appreciation for each other. And we had some of the most healing lovemaking. As we took turns just receiving the full presence and attention of two people who really loved us at the same time. It was just one of the most exquisite 6 weeks that I can recall in my life, really. And there were two things that happened. One of them, my failure during that time was to adequately appreciate how scary and painful it was going to be for Katie, my former partner, to see my primary bonding happening with somebody else right before her eyes, right? And to feel the way that bonding that we had shared for years was now shifting, and it was no longer fully in her, right? And of course, because of the new relationship energy and the newness of that experience, it was more towards Lillian at that time, right? So my failure was to inadequately grasp and really stay with Katie and support her through that process in a way that would have been more supportive and more and had her feel more loved and more resourced through that process. There was a lot of ways that I deeply appreciated her stretching and put a lot of attention on her and gave her a lot of empathy for what was going on, but I know I could have done more. That was my great failure of that process. And that's implicitly the challenge, is that anybody who endeavors to do this coming from a committed relationship has to be aware that there is a shift in primary bonding that everybody is going to have to experience and be present for, right?
Whether or not they're conscious of it, everyone's feeling that shift.
Yes. And this, I won't get into all of the details, but over the next month, Lily left for 6 weeks of international travel and work that she had already had scheduled. And Katie and I were together, and we had left the container of being together with an agreement that we were going to come together and live together when Lily came back, and that we were going to continue the experiment. And there were just ways that Katie was backtracking on what she had agreed to, and she would say things to our friends that were different than the things that I would say to our friends. And I was like finding out that we were seeing things differently, like from third parties, and it got messy. And there was a lot of resentment, and there was a lot of frustration and pain that we didn't have the capacity to navigate in that time. And so about a month into that 6 weeks that Lily was gone, Katie decided she broke up with me. She broke up with me and with Lily. And that was really painful. That was not at all what I expected. I was deeply hurt. I was shocked. I felt totally powerless. I was frustrated. My take was that we had not yet landed in a homeostasis as three people, and that we didn't have any models for it. So it's fucking hard to navigate from the start, right? We don't have any archetypes for this kind of relationship. All the archetypes we have are archetypes of two. And so I was deeply disappointed and frustrated, and felt like she bowed out of like a really beautiful love for all of us because she was unwilling to be with the difficulty. And there's truth in that. And there's also the fact that I blew it, that her heart was broken, that there were needs that weren't getting met for her in the relationship that were surfaced, that were happening before Lily came in, that were just surfaced and made more apparent in Lily's presence. And so there's all kinds of complexities. But what I will say, and I think that this is a rite of passage for anyone who is endeavoring to be in a deeply meaningful, committed relationship, whether it's poly or not, is that Katie and I had the most beautiful breakup I had ever had. We had the most loving, most respectful, most humanizing relationship transition that either of us had ever had. That we didn't make each other evil, bad, or wrong. We didn't hate and resent each other more than was just like instinctual and reflexive. We always kind of sat with that. If there was pain or grief or anger coming up, we would call each other and say, I have this thing coming up. Do you have space to hold for me? And then we would hold space for each other, and we would cry in each other's arms. And we just like, there was so much love. The love and the respect that we had for each other was so much bigger than the container that we chose to sort of put our relationship at. Of that. And I believe that anyone in a committed, successful relationship has to know how to get into and out of short-term relationships with grace and respect and with empathy and compassion, and complete those energies to the extent that they can be completed as you do the work. You know, nobody can be deeply committed relationship if you don't know how to be a hostage of that relationship, if you don't know how to get out of a relationship gracefully, right? If you don't know how to say no to something that doesn't work for you. Because what I say often to my guys in Authentic Dating Secrets program is, on the way to the most fucking amazing relationship of your life, you're going to have to say no to some really good ones. So on the way.
Yeah. So yeah. I'm like, I want to like, because of time, we could talk for our lifetime right. about this topic, because this is like right. the heart of life itself is like relationships and procreation and bringing forth that. And so I'm going to kind of like try and reel it in.
Yeah. Focus this.
In the reeling in, I work with men and women. And what I have noticed from working with men and women as an oracle, as someone who's here taking a stand for embodying heaven on earth, which means we're embodying our highest self, which means we're embodying a higher perspective, which means that when I have these men and women come to me, what I'm actually feeling is I have yet to meet a man or a woman whose authentic desire is not to have that one man, one woman union. And that however deep that is, or however many layers of misbelief, or, oh, it's not possible, or, oh, like I look at the world and I haven't seen a woman that resembles that quality ever, you know, there's so many layers of being resigned from that seed vision that people don't even know that they have that seed vision. And they actually cause more harm to themselves through, you know, going into the poly world or whatever, or it can create a further identity and so part of why I have you here is because I'm wanting to create space for people to feel safe in owning their desire to have divine union with one other partner. And I have not had to be poly because I grew up in a lot of rape and other ways of expressing the darkness of sexuality. So in my desire to have union, I look at poly and I go, I don't need to have that experience because I had my own version of abstract sexual relating. And I've always kept that desire for divine union inside. And it's not the conditioning of a man and a woman in the patriarchal wedding sense. It's this knowing that there is another being who shares a depth of connection that I share, that wants to explore what it's like to reflect that in a very tight container, and how that actually opens up a lot of possibilities in life that were not probably seen before. And for whoever, for the men who's watching and whatever, is the women who come to me being like, I'm so frustrated with poly existing because we're over here waiting for our men and our men are just over there and thinking that they're in some illusion about who we are and running from this, when we're not trying to control them. We're not trying to limit their freedom. We're not trying any of this. And so there's a lot of pain in the women around, they're not trying to control the men. They're sitting waiting for the men to remember this part of themselves that can recognize what union is in relationship. And that's very abstract. And so I guess anything that
so let's make it concrete. Yeah. A few things. Where to start? First of all, be really fucking clear about your terms and do not compromise them. If you are seeking a committed relationship, a committed monogamous relationship, claim it from the beginning and don't fuck around with people who are not a vibrational match. If you are committed to polyamorous relationship, claim it from the beginning and don't fuck around with people who are not a vibrational match, right? What many women think they have to do is pretend like they're into openness or polyamory in order to get close to a guy.
I've done
And
it.
what guys are in, what guys think they have to do is pretend that they're into committed relationship in order to get close to a woman. Everybody's fucking lying and everybody loses, right? When we can claim the radical beauty of our own truth from the beginning, then we do everyone a tremendous service by not wasting our time and energy in relationships that are not a vibrational match. Now, that said, I don't understand why people think that there's this sense that because I'm looking for a committed monogamous partner, that like whoever I run into who I fall in love with should be that person. And if there's anything valuable that I've learned from being committed to not committing to people for a while, and from being in polyamorous relationships, is that number one, it used to be like, oh my God, I'm into her and she's into me. Like, this is good. Let's go, you know? And then it was like, oh my God, like she's hot. I'm into her. There's good sexual chemistry and we're a value match. Like, let's go. Like, that's it. This is it. And then it was like, oh my God, like I'm into her. She's hot. We're a value match and I love her. Like, she must be my person. But guess what? Somebody can be super fucking hot, great sex, a value match, and you can love them and they can still not be your person.
So is there anything else that's in that makes someone your person? Like, is there any other like clarifying, refining tool, things that you've learned about yourself that maybe you didn't know you needed, but that are actually in addition to those that qualify?
Here it is. This is a great secret. Are you ready? You choose them and they choose you. You choose them and they choose you. It cannot be asymmetrical. It doesn't work unless it's a symmetrical pairing. If you have somebody who is super hot, your value match with, your lives are aligned, and you love them. But here's the thing, all three of those things can be the case, and you cannot be good for each other. You can actually, in the chemistry of the way you relate to each other and the ways that you trigger each other's trauma and the resources you bring to those triggers, that person might not be a match for you, right? There are people who trigger each other's traumas perfectly, but they don't have the resources to be able to work through the trauma. So they live in a state of re-traumatization with each other all the time, and they never break through that cycle. If you think that person is your person, then take 2 months apart and do your work and come back together and see if there's something there for you. Get really clear on the precise thing that you need. And hint, it's probably learning how to take 5 deep breaths every time you start to be triggered, and start listening to the other person for understanding instead of trying to be understood. Like, that is the relational key. Take 5 deep breaths. Anytime somebody starts to get a little bit activated, let's do it right now.
I'm already doing it.
If you can, look into their eyes while you do it. Create that connection. Breathe in synchrony with them. That one tool is the most important thing that any of us can bring to our relationship. Everything else is icing. And so there are people who really aren't ready to be with each other for whatever reason, who haven't onboarded the skills to be able to navigate the trauma that comes up in their relationship. That's what I would say is a twin flame relationship. Somebody who hits all of your buttons, but neither of you has. And there's not one of you in the relationship who's capable of taking leadership and bringing and commanding the resources that need to be brought to the level of activation that happens around your traumas together. And so
I've experienced that relationship.
Yeah, we all have, right? And you know, on some level, Lily and I can be an example of that relationship. We
risen to, you both have developed enough resources in your past experiences of healing your own trauma. You both know you have trauma. You both know you're on a healing path. So there's this level of compassion and understanding that already like helps ease that whole thing. And then you've studied a lot of tools. So the tool bag that you collectively have together is very ripe with being able to meet the challenge of what comes up. And so that's very accurate. I was in one where it wasn't matched because what the skills I had and the skills he had were actually in very different areas, and they didn't bring what was needed. There wasn't enough overlapping in our knowledge base about relationship to where if I brought a tool, he listened, and if he brought a tool, I listened. We had totally different knowledge bases about relationship evolution tools. And so there was conflict in that. And I see you both meet in a very beautiful place with your tool set on how to evolve relationships.
And both of us, essential for any of that, because there's not complete overlap, right? Essential to any of this is being willing to surrender into the other person's genius, right? Can I let my partner lead, right? Can I let her genius lead in a way that her genius exceeds mine?
So I would like to know in how you deal with that from a male ego place, even though this is a funny question in of itself. The fact that I consider you an oracle, but the fact that your partner is an oracle, and she might see things that you are totally not even
She
aware
absolutely
of.
will.
Right? And so how have you created safety in your container in order to, like, how have you allowed yourself to welcome that in? Because in my experience, I've been with people where this person, example, like they are aware that I'm an oracle, but they always want to fight me about it. And so that's why we're not compatible in some sense, because he's not actually willing to receive what my natural gift is. And so it's not, when someone shares this enlightening thing, how do you work to take it as wisdom versus someone trying to tell you what to do about you and whatever?
Well, it works in both directions. For me, as a man, I have to admit wholeheartedly and fully that my woman is fucking exponentially more sensitive and tapped into things that I am not tapped into. Because I've been violently trained out of my, if for no other reason, right? If we want to just go cultural or something, we can say I've been trained out of my sensitivity. She's been trained into hers, right? It goes bigger than that. I decided to be in a fucking 6'3", 200-pound white male body this time around, and she decided to be in this beautiful, elegant, soft female body, right? Like, it goes deep. So what is it? See, we live in a patriarchal culture that says my body is actually superior to hers, right? Like, that's some weird ass shit to start with, right? That, like, by default, because I can destroy her, my body is superior to hers. Like, is that weird as fuck when her body literally is the one through which miracles emerge in the form of birth, right? And so I just get emotional when I think about how, like, twisted our collective conditioning is around that, and how profoundly and unconsciously we dishonor the feminine genius and power and beauty. So it's in my humility, in the presence of that miracle and that otherness and that genius, that allows me to soften and open to her, the sensitivity and the what she picks up on and receives and brings to our relationship that I can, right? And it's also a recognition that I have a function in that, which is her function is to be open and receptive and, like, receive all this information. And my function is to actually container it and to ground it and to hold it and to structure it and to give her a sense of safety and protectorship in the midst of it, and to bring order and harmony into it, right? Because all of that information without the masculine grounding is overwhelming and is not actually useful, right? In a fundamental way. So that's my work. Her work, which she continues to do, is to express the information that she is receiving as curiosity, as the phenomenological, like, wow, I'm getting a hit right now that blank, not you should blank, right? It's not a projection. It's not you are a this or this is happening. It's I'm getting a feeling, I'm getting an intuition, and, like, what do you make of it? And it's also not a demand for a particular kind of behavior and response. Because the moment either of us demand something of each other, but especially if you make a demand of a man, then he is going to rebel against that demand. If there's any sense that you don't respect his sovereignty and that he should do something, he is going to rebel against it. And even the most beautiful inclination can be turned into a power struggle. But if you can bring curiosity to your man, are you willing to hear this thing that's been coming up for me? And I want to share it with you, and I want to hear what comes up for you. Like, if you bring that level of curiosity and engagement and drawing forth and respect, then you're much more likely to have that exquisite information that you receive as a tuning fork of the universe to be received. And then you as two beings can triangulate to what's happening, right? Because one eye, if you cover one eye, you can still see most of what's happening, but you can't see depth. If somebody threw a football at you right now, like, it would just be this shape that got bigger, right? It takes two eyes to see depth of field and to actually have to triangulate on where something is. And two eyes fill in all of the fuzzy spots much better in our field. So we have a much better and more accurate representation of what's here, right? And you don't see one eye trying to, like, one eye is naturally dominant, right? We all have a dominant eye, but they're not fighting for who's seeing it more right. Our brilliant mind integrates those images perfectly because the eyes aren't fighting, they're sharing information with each other, right? So more we've been brought up in a culture that's a zero-sum culture, there's always a winner and a loser, right? When we dissolve this and enter into an infinite game where there's only ever a win-win when we do it well, then what we're here to do is to share information and share perspective and get curious about what is ignited in the other person, right? And at a certain point, we have to make a fucking decision about something, right? We can't live in process all the time. And over processing all the decisions, you're going to exhaust your man, no matter how much sort of capacity he might have for emotional processing. At a certain point, men are going to get exhausted faster than women by the emotional process, because men are intrinsically more sort of like action oriented creatures in a certain way. And so we have to have, and none of us has been trained in this. We are life's experiment in intimacy. All of our social structures, all of our religious mores, all of our like strict gender identities, and all of these things that have gelled relationships, for better or for worse, for centuries, or if not millennia, have dissolved. And we're literally left with having to navigate relationship through communication, honesty, intimacy, and collaboration at a deeper level than we've ever been invited to do. And so guess what? We get to fuck it up. We get to make a bunch of mistakes. We get to do it badly until we do it better. Because anything worth doing is worth doing badly for a while so that we can get better at it. And that's a quote from Marshall Rosenberg, who's the founder of Nonviolent Communication. So that's my rant, sort of hoping to sort of touch on a lot of those pieces.
You did. You touched on all the pieces. The last part that I want to end with is, as an oracle, I have downloads about all the ways that we should's not the right word, but I think in evolutionary terms of like going forward, what would be things we could teach the children so that they don't have to learn it the hard way. And I personally am healing because I want to have children that live in heaven on earth from the birth, from the womb, in the whole process. They're just in heaven and they live in heaven because I was born into the hell dimension. And so with that, something that comes to me is standards around teaching men about fatherhood. And so because you're a father, I'm curious about what you might have to share with this idea that came up to me, for me, which is I don't think any man should have sex with a woman unless they're fully trained in what fatherhood means. And I know that's a very, very harsh, sort of very absolute statement. And so I'm curious, you being a father and having a teenager, if you might agree with the wisdom around sort of like a structure that's like, we feel that you as men, young men, should not actually have sex with women at all until you understand what fatherhood and the responsibility of fatherhood means. And I'm curious if you feel that that's a standard that makes sense, and if you have anything to share about that, because I think a lot of why there's wounding in relationships and men doing these things that are causing harm to women and whatever is because they weren't actually trained in what it means to be a father before going
Sure.
and having sex with women. And women often have wounded girls inside, and so if a man doesn't even know how to be a father or even know what that is, he's not going to know how to care for the needs of the relationship. And there's many divisions of how this could break down.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'm curious about is if you think it's if that's a symmetrical standard, then no woman should ever have sex unless she understands what it means to be a mother.
Yes, I believe I feel that that's wise and that's true, and I wish that that was standardized. But I'm not a man, so I can't speak explicitly about.
Sure. And my second question is, does understanding what it means to be a father mean that or a mother mean that you're ready to be a mother, and having sex is implicitly saying you're ready to be a mother?
I've debated this. I've debated in my own journey. I have come to the standard of myself. I don't want to have sex with a man unless I actually feel on some level that they're a father potential. Not like that they're going to be the father, but that they have that quality and they're emulating that quality. Because what I understand from my healing path is that I need that in order to have a successful relationship, because I bring the quality of mother to a relationship. And so it's integral for me to be in relational fields with others who bring the father quality, because we're able to meet in a different place than if that wasn't present. And
Mm-hmm.
from that, it's had me think, well, man, this probably should be a standard going back into one's initial exploration with sexuality, coming deep into understanding of the potential of how this could lead to a baby. And so understanding what that means and what the responsibility is required for that. And so then if someone makes the choice to interact sexually with another person, they're getting the full picture of how significant this is, and whether or not they choose to have children is another topic that's not necessarily directly related, like, but
Sure.
they understand the gravity of that choice, because in my understanding, it is, as much as it can be, oh, it's this fun thing that we just do, the gravity of it's actually a lot more than
Oh yeah.
we pay to that part of our lives, I've noticed.
Yeah. Well, let me respond. And first, I just want to say that there's something in this what I notice tingling in me when you talk about bringing the mother archetype and wanting a man to bring the father archetype to just a relationship, is that yes, as the woman, I think it's essential for you to have access to the mother archetype, but the failure of many relationships is actually too much mother archetype coming from the female and not enough, like, not enough lady archetype, not enough slut archetype, not enough other archetypes that are accessible and equally meaningful. And when a woman mothers her man too much, then sexual polarity gets destroyed, and there's actually something very sort of dangerous to the fabric of a healthy relationship. There
And I'm
are
glad that you
moments.
mentioned that. I'm glad that you mentioned that, and I don't mean explicitly only the mother,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
as a part of.
I wanted to name that as a caveat. And the same thing comes from the father archetype. If you're fathering your girlfriend too much, and not sort of partnering her and challenging her and fucking her really well, then there's going to be challenges in the relationship. And if you're looking to be mothered more than you're looking to be of service, to be uplifted, to have adventures together, to do all the things that a whole relationship entails, then we're running into trouble. To the first sort of line of inquiry here, I can promise you that I would not be the man that I am today had I not accidentally had a baby. I can promise you that I had no fucking idea what being a father was about before I got a woman pregnant who I dated for 2 months and was already broken up with for a month. Okay? That's how, and then fully committed to being the father of my child, right? Because I could not imagine not being the father of my child. That just was not a fit. I don't get it. I can't compute it. It doesn't work for me, right? And so no man, I'm sorry, I don't give a fuck how many books you've read. No man has any fucking idea what it's like to be a father until he is one. And every time you think you got it as a dad, your kid develops another level, and all of a sudden you're in brand new territory and have to start from scratch. So the journey of fatherhood, if you think that you're going to have children just to be a steward of somebody else's developmental process, you have another fucking thing coming, because every stage of their life is going to bring up all the trauma that you experienced at that stage of your life, and you are going to have to, on a daily basis, prevent yourself from transmitting that trauma through reflexes built into your nervous system, right? And you are going to have to grow and develop as a sense of separate identity who's in full stewardship of the safety and life of this person, while fully respecting their sovereignty as a being.
Well, do you think it would
Right?
be helpful to know this as a teenager, that like, if you are to have a child, this is what it looks like, so just be prepared, like
I mean, yes, absolutely. And I think that sex education does not do, I think public sex education and most kids' sex education does a horrible job conveying, first of all, the intimate emotional aspects of sex. It's like you teach somebody about their body and you think that they know enough about sex. Like, no, 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 no. Like, teach them about hormones, teach them about sort of pair bonding, teach them about what happens and how your brain literally gets co-opted by your genitals and then your heart after you've shared fluids with somebody, right? Teach them about these things. Teach them about the exquisite emotional pain that can be caused in relationships that are that go too intimate too fast, or through sexuality that you're not ready for, right? Like, we have so much room to grow as a culture around this, but And it's a multifaceted affair, because on the one hand, we have these like archaic social mores, which make sex like this like magical thing that like you only do when you're married and you love someone, and it's only meant to create a baby, right? Like that's why we do sex.
Or that it's
When in
all in the
fact,
darkness, and it's like, or you
right,
get real kinky with it, and you
right,
do the weird
right.
things that
And when actually sex has like multiple very valid functions, right? It is creative energy, whether you're creating a baby or you're creating a business together, or you're creating a work of art, or you're creating a life worth living, right? You cannot create a life worth living if you shut down your sex energy, right? It has healing energy. There's healing to be had in sex. There's deep intimate healing that we get to experience through our sexual pleasure, through our sexual intimacy, and all of that. And so there's also manifestation and magic that we can create through sex, right? Which is another form of creativity. But I think that it gets dicey to hold a standard. What I want to support you having is a standard. I want you to have a standard for the man that you let into your womb, right? And if his sense of reality around what fatherhood is matches the standard that you hold, then let him into your womb. Because at the end of the day, he gets to walk away and you're the one who's holding the bag. If you do get pregnant, right? The consequences for that for you are much more obvious. And I say obvious because I don't think there's any father who's walked away from his children in this world who doesn't suffer deeply, and who's not like on a deep karmic level doing damage to himself. I just can't, I can't imagine.
that choice is to separate from his own inner child in some
Right,
sense. Like you
right.
said, you
He's
father
abandoned
your
himself.
child,
Yeah,
you're seeing how you could still, oh, 2 years old, wow, I have that healing to do. Oh, and so if a man's running from his child, even if he doesn't like the woman, even if that's not working, he is leaving a part of himself in the dark, so to speak.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the
Well, that's
day,
probably why they're doing it, because they're like, la 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 la, keep it in the dark. That's kind of like,
yes,
if I ignore it, then it goes away. That whole idea that if we ignore something, that it actually goes
yeah,
away. So yes, I thank you for your encouragement of me holding a standard. And it actually goes a lot subtler than that. Like, I have had a spirit enter my womb, be like, I'm kind of like your son, you're partners in this life. Like, I have soul partners that are like, we're ready to be born into this planet, but we have a specific agenda. We only want a certain kind of DNA, and it's got to be clear of a lot of the trauma. And so these aren't just intellectual decisions I'm making, which can be really challenging for men who aren't even doing this sensitive stuff to understand the level of depth I'm approaching this with.
mm-hmm.
And it's because I'm here to birth heaven on earth, which means there's love and spaciousness and compassion. And so that seed also has to have that imprint in it in order for there to be more spaciousness and more ease and more heaven in the body.
Yes,
So
absolutely. And what I want to say is you don't have to actually justify that to anyone.
well, it's
For
nice
whatever part of you,
in the dark, and there's no one to talk about this stuff with, and I've chosen to
yes,
talk about it with people that don't even want to talk about this stuff. So partly why I have you on here is because I know you actively are in this exploration. You're actively receiving information, up leveling your even awareness of all this stuff in every moment. You are constantly evolving, which is why I had to ask you about this stuff and your experience, because not many people want to talk about it, or even they're like, it's not a part of their paradigm.
yeah. And what I want to say about fatherhood and about children, we probably have to wrap up here pretty soon, but is that I'm sorry, let me double check something. I might be missing an appointment right now. Yeah, hang on.
Well,
I just need to make a quick communication.
yeah, and then we can be like 2 minutes and wrap it up. Thank you for your time.
Okay.
Yeah, you're going to say last piece about father.
Yeah, what I'll say is a couple of things. Women have two built-in rites of passage in their bodies. The first one is menses. The second one is birth. Like, these are rites of passage for women throughout the generations. Some women can choose not to have one of those rites of passage, but it's there and it's built in. Powerful rites of passage that we can undergo as men, to be a father, to know what it is to really truly prioritize somebody else's well-being over our own. And
what are those rites of passage? I think
and that journey, like I've said, what's that?
And what are those rites of passage for the men? I think it cut
The
out.
rite of passage for a man is fatherhood. He can choose it or not choose it, but it is a rite of passage into adulthood, into a true level of maturity and sovereignty and kingship. And not every man has to have a baby to be a father. Some men choose to express their kingship, sovereignty, and like sacred service and protectorship in different ways, by building an organization, by founding, there's all kinds of ways that can happen. But the direct path is through fatherhood, and avoiding fatherhood is a way of avoiding rites of passage in manhood to a certain extent, if you've made a baby especially. But what I will say about children and about how we are being evolved to raise our children is that we less and less actually have to teach our children what they need to know. And we more and more have to embody our values and embody an implicit trust in children and their innate intelligence. We have been formed by a culture that has this thing about original sin, and that we have to sort of violently train these animals to be pro-social and kind and compassionate, and we have to control their behavior in order to get them to act civilized, when in fact true compassion, true care, true virtue is latent in every being, in their DNA. It is latent in us. We are built to give, to love giving, and to feel some of the most delicious endorphins we can experience sober in the act of giving. And all of the ancient cultures were gift cultures. They were gift cultures. There was no barter. There was very little barter in ancient cultures, actually. They went straight from gift economy to some sort of token economy, which is like, oh, you just gave me a gift and I want to give you a token of something, even though, I don't have anything that you value, right? So money grew out of this sense of token economy. But what I'm getting distracted from here is that we are innately good. Children are innately intelligent, that it is more our job to keep them safe and model healthy behaviors through empathy, through boundaries, through care and love and structure, than it is for us to manage their behavior. Because childhood is intrinsically an experiment. It's an experimental process. Kids are supposed to act like little monsters as they do the experiments they need to do to get the data they need to get to move through their different developmental phases. And as I told people when my son was a little punk, and sometimes I did not like him when he was a little kid, I said, I'd rather my kid be an asshole at 8 than at 18. And he got to be an asshole at 8, not a total asshole. Like of course, like I had boundaries for him, but I also let him run his own experiments. And I told people, if you want to tell him how he's impacting your behavior, just let him know and ask him to do something different. Like, why are you coming to me to talk to me about what my kid is doing when you can just talk to him? He's a human being. And that has borne out. Like, thank goodness, my unschooled son, who literally spent just days in the woods and days listening to books on tape and Greek myths while playing Legos as a child, and never did hardly any math homework until he was in freshman year of high school, decided to go to high school and decided that suddenly he loved academia, and now he's going to Stanford on a full ride academic scholarship. Like, all him. all because of him. We never pressured him. In fact, I was like, dude, you can just go to sleep early and not get an A on that test, you know? And he's like, no, I want it. So when I raised my son, committed to nonviolence, to not making him behave in certain ways out of shame or fear of punishment, when I empathized with my son and his emotional experience rather than shaming him into silence, and when I listened to my son and what he wanted and supported him in pursuing his dreams instead of made him support to seek out my dreams, then he became a human being not only capable of making amazing choices for himself around academics, but he's actually far more emotionally and relationally intelligent than most of the adult men I know. At 17 years old, he's like, I'm going to take a pause from dating because I notice I look for validation outside myself a lot, and it's easy to get from girls, and I just really need to self-source. This is my son just like telling me this at 17, right? And so when we do trust children, when we do our work as adults as their stewards, and we don't put our shit on them and try to make them behave in ways that we think are right or good, and instead let them explore and set boundaries where they can be causing harm to themselves or others, then amazing things happen. Because I just posted something yesterday, law and order was never meant to replace empathy and virtue, right? When you are over reliant on law and order as a society or as a parent, then you're actually doing a disservice to the cultivation of empathy and decency and virtue. So anyway, that's my rant, and that's really important for me to rant about, because parenthood is one of the most sacred tasks we're here to do here, and I'm really proud of my kid, and I have to I have to brag a little bit.
Thank you. I am glad you're bragging about your kid, and I'm glad that you were able to share. I'm glad that I interviewed you. I endorse you, whatever that means. I recommend him. And I have had a session with this man before, and it wasn't anything like I'd expected. It wasn't like we're going to do this structure. It's like he just shows up fully present for your experience and brings all his tools with helping you address whatever you're dealing with in relationship in the most, it's very direct, straightforward. He gives you tools. You can handle it right then and there through practice and in like integration in that moment. And so I guarantee that wherever you're at in your path, if you feel called to work with him, he can help you in wherever you're at, even if what you're going through doesn't relate to anything we're speaking about in relationship. I'm aware that what we're going into here were some deeper threads that if you're just new in relating, you might not, in exploring relationship as like an evolutionary path, you might not be grokking what we're talking about right now, and that's okay. I trust that the seeds that you've shared have landed wherever they're most abundantly going to grow in the world. And thank you for sharing your heart and your care, and thank you for your devotion to yourself and relationship and your inspiration. You definitely have inspired me, and I think that you've inspired other people in this talk too.
Maybe so. May everyone embrace our shadows and the things that we struggle with as an act of faith and trust in our evolving process and our capacity to unlock our greatest gifts, because we are just here in this great gift exchange, here to give fully of ourselves and to receive fully of all the gifts that are surrounding us and bombarding us. So may it be so for all beings.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Blessings and merry making to you.
More soon. Take good care. It's been such a pleasure. Thanks for having me on your channel and with your audience. And thanks for all of your like heartfelt questions and passionate advocacy for all of us evolving into our truth and into our gifts and leadership.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Talk soon. Bye, everyone. Ciao. It's been a pleasure. Blessings. Until we speak, until we meet, many blessings, and may the path be clearly laid out in front of you, beside you, behind you. And may you have the courage to reach out for the support you need on your path. Again, my name is Shannon. I'm a shamanic practitioner and an intimacy coach, and I am here to support the world in reclaiming our heart and our vitality, and to truly birth a world where we all live in love, compassion, and integrity with ourselves and with each other and the world around us. Many, many blessings, and until we meet,